The HOA president smiled as she tied the crying child to the pole under the burning sun. She thought she was untouchable, enforcing her twisted rules on a helpless 12-year-old girl. But she had no idea whose daughter she had just tortured. When the father arrived, the entire town would discover a truth that would destroy her forever. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The September sun beat down mercilessly on Willow Creek, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The perfectly manicured lawns and pristine white fences gave the neighborhood an air of respectability, but beneath that polished surface, something cruel was unfolding. 12-year-old Emma Martinez stood tied to a metal flagpole in the center of the community park, her small wrists bound with coarse rope that cut into her skin. Tears streamed down her dirt-stained face as dozens of neighbors walked past, some averting their eyes, others whispering behind their hands. The sun had been burning her pale skin for nearly 2 hours, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Karen Whitmore announced loudly, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite the breeze. As the Homeowners Association president, she stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant smile on her thin lips. "This is what happens when people refuse to follow the rules of our community." Emma's crime. Her elderly grandmother had accidentally planted flowers 6 inches over the property line into the common area. When Karen had demanded they be removed immediately, Emma had tried to dig them up herself to save her sick grandmother the trouble. In her haste, she had accidentally damaged one of Karen's prized rose bushes that bordered the common space. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your flowers. Please let me go. My abuela needs me. She's sick." Karen's eyes were cold as ice. "You should have thought about that before you destroyed my property, you little delinquent. Maybe an hour or 2 out here will teach you some respect. Your kind always thinks you can get away with breaking the rules." The way she said, "your kind," made several neighbors flinch. Everyone knew what she meant. Mrs. Chen, an elderly neighbor, approached cautiously. "Karen, this is too much. She's just a child. You can't leave her tied up like this. It's inhumane." "Mind your business, Helen," Karen snapped. "I'm well within my rights as HOA president to enforce community standards. Her family has been nothing but trouble since they moved here. Always breaking rules, always making excuses. That grandmother of hers lets her garden grow wild, their grass is half an inch too long, and don't even get me started on the tacky decorations they put up for their Mexican holidays." What Karen didn't mention was her real motivation. Emma's father, Miguel Martinez, had recently filed a formal complaint against her for harassment and discrimination. The Martinez family was one of only 3 Hispanic families in the predominantly white neighborhood, and Karen had made their lives miserable since day one. From the moment they moved in 3 years ago, Karen had been watching them like a hawk. She measured their grass with a ruler. She complained about the smell of Rosa's cooking wafting from their windows. She sent them violation notices for the smallest infractions while ignoring identical issues at homes owned by her friends. Emma's grandmother, Rosa, was battling stage 4 cancer and could barely walk. Emma's mother had died 3 years ago in a car accident, leaving Miguel to raise Emma alone while caring for his sick mother. They were struggling, barely holding on, and Karen had made it her personal mission to push them out of the neighborhood. "You don't belong here," Karen had told Miguel to his face just last week. "This is a community for people with standards. People who respect American values. Why don't you go back to where you came from?" Miguel had responded calmly, though Emma could see the anger burning in his eyes. "We are American, Mrs. Whitmore. This is where we come from. And if you continue to harass my family, I will take legal action." That threat had enraged Karen. And when she saw Emma frantically digging up those flowers this morning, she saw her opportunity for revenge. As the afternoon wore on, Emma's skin turned bright red from sun exposure. She swayed on her feet, dizzy and dehydrated. A few neighbors had tried to bring her water, but Karen had stopped them, threatening HOA violations and fines. Anyone who helps this child will face immediate penalties, Karen announced. $5,000 fine for interfering with HOA enforcement actions. Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher who had lived in Willow Creek for 40 years, couldn't take it anymore. This is psychological torture, Karen. She's a child. I'm calling the police and I'm calling her father. Go ahead, Karen said smugly. I haven't broken any laws. This is private community property, and I'm enforcing our bylaws. The girl damaged private property worth hundreds of dollars. This is a citizen's disciplinary action, perfectly legal under our community charter. She held up the thick HOA rulebook triumphantly. Section 14, paragraph 3, subsection B clearly states that the HOA president has the authority to detain and discipline anyone who willfully destroys community or private property within the neighborhood boundaries. I'm well within my rights. But Mr. Peterson did call the police. And he called someone else too, someone Karen would soon wish she had never crossed. When Miguel Martinez received the call, he was 3 hours away at a conference in the state capital. As an investigative journalist for a major newspaper, he had been researching a story on government corruption. The moment he heard what was happening to his daughter, he felt his blood run cold. She's been tied up for how long? Miguel's voice shook with barely controlled rage. Almost 3 hours now, Mr. Peterson said. I'm so sorry, Miguel. I should have cut her down myself, but Karen threatened. It's not your fault, Miguel interrupted. Thank you for calling me. I'm coming. Tell Emma I'm coming. Miguel made 3 more phone calls as he raced to his car. The first was to his editor, Sarah Chen. I need you to hold the front page tomorrow. I'm working on the most important story of my career. The second was to his lawyer, David Kim. I need you to prepare charges for child abuse, false imprisonment, assault, and civil rights violations. I'm sending you photos and witness statements within the hour. The third was to someone he had hoped he would never have to call for help again, his brother, Roberto Martinez, a federal judge who owed him more favors than he could count. Roberto, I need everything you can give me on HOA law, children's rights, and hate crime statutes. And I need it in 2 hours. What's happened? Roberto's voice was sharp with concern. Someone hurt Emma. Someone hurt my baby girl, and they're going to pay for it. What Karen Whitmore didn't know was that Miguel Martinez wasn't just any journalist. Before he had settled down to raise his daughter in quiet obscurity, he had been one of the most respected investigative reporters in the country, known for taking down corrupt politicians and corporate criminals. He had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes and had connections that ran deep into every level of government, media, and law enforcement. He had left that high-profile life behind when his wife died, choosing to raise Emma in a small town where she could have a normal childhood. He had taken a quieter job at a regional newspaper, content to write local stories and be present for his daughter. But Karen Whitmore had just awakened a sleeping giant. Miguel drove like a man possessed, breaking every speed limit, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with images of his sweet Emma, his whole world, tied up like an animal in the hot sun. Rage burned in his chest like molten lava, but he forced himself to think clearly. Rage alone wouldn't help Emma. He needed to be smart. Strategic, devastating. He called Mr. Peterson back. I need you to do something for me. Document everything. Photos, videos, witness statements. Get as many neighbors as you can to go on record about what they've seen. And whatever you do, don't let them untie her until I get there. I know that sounds cruel, but I need the police to see exactly what's been done to her. Miguel, she's suffering. I know. God, I know. But if they untie her before the authorities document this properly, Karen will claim it was only for a few minutes. We need evidence. We need this documented so thoroughly that there's no way she can lie her way out of it. His voice broke. Please. I'm driving as fast as I can. Just keep her talking. Keep her aware. Tell her daddy's coming and that I love her more than anything in this world. While Miguel drove, Mr. Peterson organized the neighbors. Mrs. Chen took photographs from every angle. The Johnsons, an elderly black couple who had suffered their own abuse from Karen, recorded video. Young Marcus Williams, a teenager who Emma sometimes babysat, gave a tearful statement about how Karen had called Emma racist slurs. She called her a dirty Mexican just last week, Marcus said, his voice shaking with anger. Emma was crying, but she didn't tell her dad because she didn't want him to worry. Karen's been bullying her for months. When the police finally arrived, they found a scene that looked like something from a different century. A child, tied to a pole in the blazing sun, surrounded by a crowd of people who were prevented from helping her by a woman wielding an HOA rulebook like a weapon. Officer Jane Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Willow Creek Police Force, felt her stomach turn. She had 2 daughters of her own. "Mrs. Whitmore, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Karen smiled confidently. "Officer Morrison, thank goodness you're here. This child destroyed my property, and I'm exercising my legal right as HOA president to enforce community discipline. It's all in the bylaws." She thrust the rulebook forward. Officer Morrison didn't even look at it. "Untie her. Now." "I will not. This is private property, Anne. Untie her now, or I will arrest you for child abuse and false imprisonment." Karen's smile faltered. "You can't arrest me. I'm enforcing community rules. Chief Patterson is my cousin. He'll tell you I'm within my rights." "I don't care if the chief is your twin brother," Officer Morrison said coldly. "Untie this child immediately." But before Karen could respond, a car screeched into the parking lot. Miguel Martinez emerged like a force of nature, his face a mask of controlled fury. He had broken every speed record getting there, making the 3-hour drive in just over 2 hours. The crowd parted for him instinctively. "Emma," he roared, sprinting across the grass. Karen turned, her face paling slightly when she saw the fury in his eyes. But she recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders. "Mr. Martinez, your daughter destroyed my property, Anne." Miguel didn't even look at her. He reached Emma in seconds, falling to his knees and carefully untying the ropes with shaking hands. The moment the rope came loose, he saw the deep red marks on her wrists where she had been bound, the raw skin, the blood. The moment she was free, Emma collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "Daddy," she whimpered. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt her flowers. I was just trying to help Abuela. I didn't mean to be bad." "Shoo, baby, shoo," he whispered, his own tears falling into her hair as he held her trembling body. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You are not bad. You are good and kind and perfect. I've got you now. Nobody will ever hurt you again." He lifted her easily, cradling her like he had when she was a toddler, and turned toward his car. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. That was when Karen made her fatal mistake. She stepped into his path, her hand outstretched to grab his arm. "Where do you think you're going? We're not finished here. There are procedures that must be followed, compensation that must be paid for the damage to my roses. That child owes me at least $300, and if you think you can just..." Miguel's eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her take an involuntary step back. She had never seen such cold, controlled fury in a human being's eyes. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator that had just seen its cub attacked. "Move," he said quietly. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority and barely restrained violence. "Or I will move you, and you will not like how I do it." Officer Morrison stepped forward quickly, sensing the situation could escalate. "Mr. Martinez, we understand you're upset, but..." "Officer," Miguel said, still not taking his eyes off Karen, "I am taking my daughter to the emergency room. She has been assaulted and tortured by this woman. She has suffered severe sun exposure, dehydration, psychological trauma, and physical injury. Look at her wrists. Look at her face. She's been tied up in the sun for over 3 hours." He finally looked at Officer Morrison, and she saw the tears streaming down his face even as his voice remained steady and controlled. "I am pressing charges for child abuse, child endangerment, false imprisonment, assault, battery, and civil rights violations. My lawyer will be contacting your department within the hour with a full brief. I am also contacting the FBI regarding potential hate crime charges. But right now, right this second, I am taking my daughter to get medical help. If you need to stop me, you'll have to arrest me." Karen laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made several people in the crowd gasp. "You can't press charges against me. I was enforcing community rules. She damaged my property. I have every right to discipline someone who vandalizes my roses. Those roses are worth thousands of dollars. Show-quality roses." Miguel finally looked at her, and his smile was terrifying in its coldness. "Your roses are weeds compared to my daughter. And by the time I'm done with you, Mrs. Whitmore, you're going to wish you had never even looked at her. We'll see about your rights. We'll see about a lot of things." Officer Morrison made a decision. "Mr. Martinez, take your daughter to the hospital. We'll need your statement later, but Emma's well-being comes first. Mrs. Whitmore, you need to come with me to the station. There are some questions we need to ask you." "I'm not going anywhere," Karen shrieked. "Chief Patterson will hear about this. You can't treat me like a criminal. I'm the HOA president. I have rights." "So did that little girl," Officer Morrison said coldly. "And you violated every single one of them." Miguel carried Emma to his car and drove to Willow Creek Memorial Hospital, where doctors immediately took her into emergency care. While they worked on her, Miguel made his calls, his voice cold and precise as he laid out exactly what had happened and exactly what he needed. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Sarah Williams, came out after an hour with a grim expression. "Mr. Martinez, Emma is going to be okay physically, but what she's been through is serious. She has second-degree sunburns on her face, neck, and arms. She's severely dehydrated. The rope burns on her wrists are deep and will require careful treatment to prevent infection and scarring. But my biggest concern is the psychological trauma." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What was done to your daughter constitutes torture. She was publicly humiliated, physically restrained, and left in pain for hours while people watched. That kind of trauma doesn't just go away. She's going to need counseling, possibly for years." Miguel's hands clenched into fists. "Document everything. Every injury, every mark, every psychological effect. I want a complete medical report that details exactly what this woman did to my child. Can you do that for me, doctor?" Dr. Williams nodded. "I already am. And Mr. Martinez? I have a daughter Emma's age. What happened to her is unconscionable. You have my full support, and I'll testify to whatever you need." Over the next 24 hours, while Emma slept in a hospital bed with 4 fluids dripping into her arm, Miguel became a man possessed. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He worked with a fury and focus that reminded him of his investigative reporting days, but this time it was personal. This time it was for Emma. He interviewed witnesses, collected statements, and gathered evidence. Mr. Peterson provided photographs showing the progression of Emma's suffering over those 3 hours. Mrs. Chen had video of Karen refusing to let people give Emma water. Marcus Williams had recordings on his phone of Karen making racist comments to Emma over the past months. But Miguel didn't stop there. He started digging into Karen Whitmore's life, and what he found made his blood boil even hotter. Karen had a history of this behavior. She had been HOA president in 2 previous neighborhoods before Willow Creek, and in both cases, she had been forced out after complaints of harassment and discrimination. She specifically targeted minority families, using the HOA rules as a weapon to make their lives miserable until they moved. The Johnsons told him their story with tears in their eyes. "She fined us $5,000 for painting our front door the wrong shade of white," Mr. Johnson said. "The paint chip in the HOA guidelines was so close to what we used that you couldn't tell the difference, but she had it analyzed and said it was 0.3% off. $5,000 for 0.3%. Mrs. Johnson added, "We were going to fight it, but our son needed surgery and we couldn't afford a lawyer and the medical bills. So we paid it. We paid that horrible woman," and she smiled the whole time. The Patels, a sweet Indian family with 3 young children, had their own horror stories. "She called the police on us for offensive cooking smells when my wife was making traditional food for Diwali," Dr. Patel said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "The police came to our house 3 times in 1 week. Our children were terrified. One officer finally told us privately that Karen had been calling in complaints constantly, and he was sorry but they had to respond to every call." The Nguyen family, Vietnamese immigrants who ran a successful restaurant in town, had been cited for having too many cars in their driveway during their daughter's wedding celebration. The fine was $10,000. Story after story, family after family, all with the same pattern. Karen targeted anyone who wasn't white, anyone who was different, anyone she could push around. And she used the HOA rules as her weapon. But Miguel found something else too, something that would prove to be Karen's complete undoing. Late on the second night, while Emma slept and Miguel pored over HOA financial documents that a sympathetic board member had leaked to him, he found the smoking gun. Karen Whitmore had been embezzling from the HOA for years. The association collected dues of $400 per household per year. With 200 homes in Willow Creek, that was $80,000 annually. But the actual expenses Karen reported were minimal: basic landscaping, utilities for the community center, and minor repairs. Where was the rest of the money going? Miguel traced the financial records with the skill of someone who had exposed corporate fraud before. Karen had set up a shell company, Willow Creek Community Services, that charged the HOA for various maintenance and consulting services. But Willow Creek Community Services was owned by Karen herself. She had been paying herself $50,000 a year for services that were never rendered. Over the 6 years she had been president, she had stolen more than $300,000 from the homeowners. Miguel smiled grimly as he compiled the evidence. Karen Whitmore hadn't just tortured his daughter. She had committed fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other crimes. And he was going to make sure she paid for every single one. On the 3rd day, while Emma was being discharged from the hospital with a prescription for burn cream and a referral to a child psychologist, Miguel's first article went live. HOA President Tortures 12-year-old Girl appeared on the front page of his newspaper's website at 6 in the morning. By noon, it had been shared 200,000 times. By evening, it was the top trending story on social media. The article didn't just describe what had happened to Emma. Miguel had done what he did best: he had investigated thoroughly and written devastatingly. The piece included photographs of Emma tied to the pole, medical reports documenting her injuries, and statements from witnesses. But it also provided context: Karen's history of targeting minority families, the pattern of harassment, the racist comments. Miguel quoted Karen directly from witness testimony: "Your kind always thinks you can get away with breaking the rules. This is a community for people with standards, people who respect American values. Why don't you go back to where you came from?" The article revealed that Emma's mother had died 3 years ago, that her grandmother was battling cancer, and that Emma had been trying to help her sick grandmother when the incident occurred. It showed a picture of Emma from a school award ceremony where she had won the Citizenship Award for her volunteer work helping elderly neighbors. The contrast was devastating: a kind, motherless child trying to help her dying grandmother versus a cruel woman wielding petty power to torture her in the name of HOA rules. By the end of the day, 3 major news networks had picked up the story. Karen Whitmore's phone was ringing off the hook with reporters requesting interviews, but she refused to comment. Her lawyer told her to stay silent, but the damage was done. The next morning, Miguel published his second article, HOA President Under Investigation for Embezzlement. This piece laid out the financial evidence in meticulous detail. Miguel had obtained bank statements, invoices, and internal HOA documents that showed the pattern of theft. He had interviewed a forensic accountant who confirmed that the shell company was a clear case of fraud. He even had emails between Karen and her husband where they discussed using the embezzled money to renovate their kitchen and buy a luxury car. The article ended with a statement from the HOA board announcing that they were launching a full investigation and had contacted law enforcement. By the end of the week, Karen Whitmore's world had completely collapsed. She was fired as HOA president in an emergency board meeting where every single member voted for her removal. The vote was 10-0, with Karen not allowed to participate. The local police, under pressure from the district attorney and the media attention, arrested her on charges of child abuse, false imprisonment, and assault. The bail was set at $50,000, which her lawyer paid, but Karen's mugshot was plastered across every news outlet. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation into whether Karen's actions constituted a hate crime. The county prosecutor's office announced they were filing embezzlement and fraud charges related to the HOA theft. Multiple families in Willow Creek announced they were filing civil lawsuits against Karen for harassment and discrimination. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, a dentist in town, filed for divorce and moved out of their house. In his filing, he claimed he had been unaware of the embezzled funds and was cooperating with investigators. He also released a statement condemning his wife's actions and expressing sympathy for Emma and the Martinez family. Karen's friends abandoned her. Women who had been part of her book club and tennis group suddenly claimed they had always thought she was too strict and had privately disagreed with her methods. The Homeowners Association filed a civil suit to recover the embezzled funds, which meant Karen's house and assets could be seized. And through it all, Miguel kept writing. Article after article, each one meticulously researched and devastatingly accurate. He wrote about the psychology of HOA tyranny. He wrote about racism hiding behind rules and regulations. He wrote about the failure of community members to stand up to bullies. He also wrote about Emma's recovery, with her permission. He shared her story of resilience, how she was dealing with the trauma, how she was determined not to let what happened define her. The public fell in love with Emma Martinez, this brave, kind girl who had suffered so much but still had compassion in her heart. Donations poured in, more than $200,000, for Emma's college fund and Rosa's medical bills. People from across the country sent letters of support. A famous child psychologist offered to provide therapy for Emma pro bono. A prestigious private school offered Emma a full scholarship. But Miguel's greatest achievement was yet to come. 6 months after that terrible September day, Karen Whitmore stood in a courtroom facing criminal charges. She had lost weight, her hair was no longer perfectly styled, and her designer clothes had been replaced with a simple gray suit. She looked like what she was, a broken woman who had lost everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence. Medical experts testified about Emma's injuries. Psychologists testified about the trauma. Neighbors testified about the pattern of harassment and racism. Forensic accountants testified about the embezzlement. And Emma testified. Miguel had debated whether to put his daughter on the stand. It would be traumatic for her to relive that day in front of a courtroom full of strangers. But Emma had insisted. "I want to tell people what she did, Daddy," she had said. "I want them to know the truth. And I want other kids who are being bullied to know that it's okay to speak up." So Emma took the stand, small and brave in her best dress, and told her story. She described how she had been trying to help her sick grandmother. How she had accidentally damaged Karen's roses and immediately apologized. How Karen had screamed at her, called her names, and tied her to the pole. "She said I was a dirty Mexican," Emma said quietly, her voice steady even though tears rolled down her cheeks. "She said my family didn't belong in Willow Creek. She said we should go back to where we came from, but this is where we come from. This is our home. Emma described the hours tied to the pole. The burning sun, the thirst, the pain in her wrists. The humiliation of having neighbors walk past and stare at her. I kept thinking my daddy would come, she said. I knew he would come save me. And he did. He always does. When Emma finished her testimony, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge had to wipe her eyes. Karen's defense attorney tried to argue that his client had been exercising legitimate authority, that she hadn't intended to cause severe harm, that she had mental health issues that explained her behavior. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: child abuse, false imprisonment, assault and battery, embezzlement, fraud, and civil rights violations. 3 months later, Karen Whitmore stood before the judge for sentencing. The judge, a woman who had served on the bench for 20 years, looked at Karen with undisguised contempt. Mrs. Whitmore, in my 20 years as a judge, I have seen many cases of child abuse. But what you did to Emma Martinez stands out for its calculated cruelty. You didn't harm this child in a moment of anger or loss of control. You deliberately, methodically tortured her for hours. You used your position of authority to abuse a vulnerable child whose only crime was trying to help her sick grandmother. The judge paused, letting her words sink in. You stole from your neighbors. You harassed and discriminated against families based on their race and ethnicity. You wielded petty power like a tyrant, making people's lives miserable because you could. And when a 12-year-old girl made a minor mistake, you saw it as an opportunity to punish not just her, but her entire family. Karen stood with her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. The law allows me to sentence you to up to 15 years in prison for these combined charges. I am going to use every bit of that discretion. You are sentenced to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. You are ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA for all embezzled funds, plus penalties and interest. You are ordered to pay for all of Emma Martinez's medical and psychological care. And you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position for the rest of your life. The judge looked directly at Karen. I hope that every single day you spend in that prison cell, you remember the face of the little girl you tortured. I hope you see her tears in your dreams. I hope you feel even a fraction of the pain you caused her and her family. And I hope that when you finally leave prison, you spend the rest of your life trying to become a better person than you were on that September day. Karen was led away in handcuffs, sobbing. Miguel and Emma sat in the courtroom, Emma's hand in her father's. Rosa sat on Emma's other side in her wheelchair, weak from her treatments but determined to be there for this moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Miguel and Emma, but he shielded his daughter carefully, holding her close as cameras flashed. He made a brief statement that would be replayed on news broadcasts across the country. What happened to my daughter was not just about one cruel woman, he said, his voice clear and strong. It was about a system that allowed someone to abuse power unchecked for years. It was about neighbors who saw wrong being done and were too afraid to stand up. It was about racism and discrimination hiding behind rules and regulations that are supposed to serve communities, not oppress them. He paused, looking down at Emma with infinite tenderness. My daughter is the strongest person I know. She survived something no child should ever have to endure, and she stood up in that courtroom and told the truth with courage that most adults don't possess. But she shouldn't have had to be strong. She should have been protected by her community, by the systems that are supposed to keep children safe. Miguel's voice grew stronger, more passionate. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm launching a foundation called Emma's Voice to help families fight HOA abuse and discrimination. We will provide legal assistance to families who are being harassed or discriminated against by their HOAs. We will work to reform HOA laws to prevent this kind of abuse. We will create educational programs to teach people about their rights and how to stand up to bullies in positions of petty power. He smiled down at Emma. And we will make sure that what happened to Emma Martinez never happens to another child. We will make sure that her voice, and the voices of all the families who have suffered in silence, are finally heard." The crowd erupted in applause. That evening, Miguel and Emma sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rosa was inside, resting but feeling better now that the stress had lifted and her treatments were fully paid for. "Daddy?" Emma said softly, her head on his shoulder. "Yes, baby. Was it wrong what I did? Damaging her flowers? Is that why this all happened?" Miguel turned to face her, cupping her face gently in his hand so she had to look into his eyes. "Emma, listen to me carefully. You made a small mistake while trying to do something good. You were trying to help your abuela, someone you love, who is sick and needed your help. That shows how beautiful your heart is. We all make mistakes. Every single person makes mistakes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, you could have done would ever justify what Karen Whitmore did to you. Do you understand me?" Emma nodded, but Miguel could see she still carried guilt. "Baby, let me tell you something. Karen Whitmore didn't hurt you because of the flowers. She hurt you because there's something broken inside her, something mean and cruel that has nothing to do with you. She would have found some excuse, some reason, because that's what bullies do. They look for excuses to hurt people who they think are weaker than them." Miguel pulled her close again. "You are not weak. You are not bad. You are good and kind and brave. You have a heart full of love, and that's a precious thing. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you deserve to be hurt. You deserve to be loved and protected and cherished. That's what you deserve." Fresh tears spilled down Emma's cheeks, but these were different, tears of relief, of finally beginning to believe that she wasn't at fault, that she was worthy of love and protection. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought maybe I deserved it. She kept saying I was bad, that I was trouble, that people like me didn't belong. And I started to believe it." Miguel felt his heart break all over again. This was the real damage Karen had done, not just the physical injuries, but the wound to Emma's sense of self-worth. "You belong everywhere, Mija. You belong in this neighborhood, in this town, in this country, in this world. You are American. You are human. You are loved. And anyone who tries to tell you different is wrong. Do you hear me? They are wrong." They sat together as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, father and daughter, survivors of cruelty, bound together by love stronger than any rope that had ever bound Emma to that pole. In the months and years that followed, life in Willow Creek changed dramatically. A new HOA board was elected, led by Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Chen, committed to fairness, transparency, and community building. They rewrote the bylaws to prevent abuse of power, created an independent review board for complaints, and established strict limits on fines and penalties. The neighborhood rallied around the Martinez family in a way that helped heal some of the wounds. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up before now became fierce defenders of the family. They organized meal trains when Rosa was too sick to cook. They helped with yard work when Miguel was overwhelmed. They included Emma in every community activity, making sure she felt welcomed and valued. Emma slowly healed, helped by therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chen, the child psychologist who had volunteered her services. The nightmares gradually became less frequent. The panic attacks when she saw ropes or flagpoles slowly diminished. The shame and guilt she had carried began to lift. But healing wasn't linear. There were bad days when Emma couldn't get out of bed, when the memories were too overwhelming. There were times when she lashed out in anger at the injustice of what had happened. There were moments when she broke down crying over seemingly small things, a rope in gym class, a red rose in a flower arrangement, the smell of sunscreen. Miguel was there for all of it, patient and loving and unwavering in his support. He learned about childhood trauma. He adjusted his work schedule to be more available. He celebrated every small victory in Emma's recovery. And he built Emma's voice into a powerful force for change. The foundation grew rapidly, funded by donations from across the country and staffed by volunteers who had their own stories of HOA abuse. They helped dozens of families fight back against harassment and discrimination. They lobbied for state legislation to reform HOA laws. They created educational materials and training programs. Miguel also continued his investigative journalism, but now with a specific focus, exposing HOA abuse and discrimination across the country. He uncovered case after case of HOAs being used as tools of oppression, particularly against minority families, the elderly, and the disabled. His reporting led to reforms in 12 states. It sparked a national conversation about the need for HOA accountability. It gave a voice to thousands of families who had suffered in silence, afraid to speak up. And through it all, Emma was his inspiration and his partner. As she grew older and stronger, she became involved in the foundation's work. She spoke at schools about standing up to bullies. She testified before state legislatures about the need for HOA reform. She wrote an essay about her experience that was published in a major magazine and read by millions of people. 1 year after that terrible September day, Emma stood in the same park where she had been tied to a pole. But this time, she was there for a dedication ceremony. The community had voted unanimously to create a memorial garden on the spot. The flagpole had been removed, replaced by a beautiful flowering dogwood tree. Around it, they had planted a garden full of flowers representing different cultures and communities: roses, marigolds, cherry blossoms, lotus flowers, and more. A plaque at the base of the tree read, "Emma's Garden, a reminder that cruelty has no place in our community, that diversity makes us stronger, and that courage can bloom even in the hardest soil." Dedicated September 15, 2024. Emma, now 13, stood before the crowd of neighbors and spoke with a confidence that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "When I was tied to that pole," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I felt so alone. I felt like nobody cared, like nobody would help me. I felt like maybe I deserved it, like maybe there was something wrong with me." She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd, neighbors who had found their courage, who had stood up, who had changed. "But I was wrong. I wasn't alone. Mr. Peterson called my dad and the police. Mrs. Chen took pictures to document what was happening. Marcus recorded evidence. And so many of you spoke up, even when you were scared, even when it was hard." Emma's eyes found her father in the crowd, and she smiled. "My dad taught me that one person can make a difference. That speaking the truth, even when it's painful, even when it's scary, is the right thing to do. And all of you taught me that a community can change, can become better, can choose kindness over cruelty." She turned to look at the dogwood tree, its white blossoms bright against the blue sky. "This tree will bloom every spring. And when it does, I hope it reminds all of us that beauty can come from pain, that growth can come from struggle, and that love is stronger than hate. Always." The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears. Rosa sat in her wheelchair, weak but smiling, so proud of her granddaughter's strength. Miguel stood with his arm around his mother, his own tears falling freely. After the ceremony, as people gathered for refreshments and conversation, a young girl about Emma's age approached shyly. She was new to the neighborhood, and Emma hadn't met her yet. "Hi," the girl said quietly. "I'm Sophia. My family just moved here last month. We're from El Salvador." Emma smiled warmly. "Welcome to Willow Creek." "I'm Emma." "I know," Sophia said. "Everyone's told me about you. About what happened. About how brave you are." She hesitated, then continued. "At our old neighborhood, the HOA people were mean to us too. They said we didn't belong, that we were bringing down property values. My mom and dad were so scared to move here, worried it would be the same. But everyone says it's different now. That you made it different." Emma felt her heart squeeze. This was why all the pain, all the struggle had been worth it. So that girls like Sophia wouldn't have to suffer what she had suffered. It is different, Emma said firmly. And if anyone ever treats you badly, you tell me. Okay? You tell me, and my dad, and we'll make sure they stop. Nobody should ever feel like they don't belong. Sophia's face broke into a huge smile, and she threw her arms around Emma in an impulsive hug. As Emma hugged her back, she looked over Sophia's shoulder at her father. Miguel was watching them, and the pride and love in his eyes made Emma feel like she could do anything. Over the next few years, Emma continued to heal and grow stronger. The foundation her father created helped hundreds of families across the country. Karen Whitmore remained in prison, a cautionary tale of what happens when cruelty goes unchecked. On Emma's 16th birthday, she stood before a crowd at a national conference on HOA reform. She had been invited to give the keynote speech, and hundreds of people filled the auditorium to hear her story. For years ago, I was tied to a pole and tortured by a woman who thought she had the power to break me, Emma said, her voice strong and clear. She wanted to teach me a lesson about knowing my place. But she failed. Because she didn't understand that cruelty can only win if good people stay silent. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. My father taught me that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. That's why we fight. That's why we speak up. That's why we never, ever give up. The applause was deafening. That evening, back home in Willow Creek, Emma and Miguel sat on their porch swing one last time, watching the sunset just as they had done so many times before. I'm proud of you, Mija, Miguel said softly. So incredibly proud. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Daddy, Emma replied, resting her head on his shoulder. You saved me that day. You save me every day. We saved each other, Miguel said, kissing the top of her head. In the park down the street, the dogwood tree bloomed with thousands of white flowers, a living testament to the truth that love is stronger than hate, that courage can overcome cruelty, and that one girl's pain had become the catalyst for change that would protect thousands of children for generations to come. Karen Whitmore had tried to break Emma Martinez. Instead, she had created a warrior, a voice for the voiceless, and a force for justice that would echo far beyond the small town of Willow Creek. And every spring, when that dogwood tree burst into bloom, the town remembered. They remembered the price of cruelty, the power of speaking up, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who had turned their darkest day into a light that would shine for years to come. Justice had been served. Love had triumphed. And Emma Martinez had not just survived, she had transformed her suffering into hope for countless others.